Hello, we're glad you joined us for another episode of the Low-Code Café. This is episode number 180 for Wednesday, February 19, 2025. Today we're going to talk about part two of our testing series, Mastering Business Logic Testing, and I'll be guiding you through that. I am Dale Warner, Head of Support for Plantin joined capably by Patrick Anderson, a Technical Success Manager here at Plantin and together we'll cover this topic, I hope, very well today. The Low Code Cafe is a bi-weekly event that we do every other Wednesday, 10 a.m. Central Time, and it's an opportunity for us to show you what's going on with Plantin do some hands-on low coding, show techniques that whether you need them now or sometime in the future, hopefully something that will be useful. And so we have 180 hours of very good content out on YouTube. We record all of these as they go. They get up on YouTube usually the same day or the next day, and we split them up with chapters so that you can jump to the spot that you missed or want to dig in deeper on. So we encourage you to sign up for the youtube.com/plantinap. Our agenda today, I'll be doing a little bit of information on from the trenches of support, and then we'll go right on into our hands-on low coding, which will be the biggest part of our hour. We welcome engagement, so if you have a question along the way, you can use the chat window, you can use the question and answer window, or raise your hand if you want to talk. After it's all over with, there's a feedback form. We'd love to hear from you what you think about the episode, what you'd like to see in another episode. As I mentioned, we do these bi-weekly, so our next live webinar is scheduled for March 5th. So, from the trenches of support, we are currently on version 1. We have released version 1.26 that came out in June of last year. There are a number of hot fixes available, and so we'll look at those in a moment. Version 1.26 is the only version that's currently in our support until window. We encourage you to get to version 126. It is our most it is a very stable version, most stable version yet, has most features yet. We're working behind the scenes on our next version, 1.27, and our beta is targeted for soon. I would expect it to happen later this month, but those of you who participate in the beta testing, we would encourage you to do that. So for hot fixes, I have a system that we bring up and update each episode, and so this will show you the hot fixes in the last 2 weeks. You can get to these on your system by going to configuration updates hotfixes. And so we have a number of them here since the last 2 weeks. Click into the details. The app builder update provides improved compatibility between Plantin App and 2Sexy. 2Sexy is a content management system that is popular with many of our clients, and so if you're using that, we highly recommend that you install version 1.26.299. And there's usually some other changes that have to happen in the web config as well. And I guess I will point out that on our website, campfire.plantinapp.com, there is a contribution that is a 2Sexy Plantin App repair script. So after you install 2Sexy, sometimes it will cause your site to, excuse me, the two products together have some conflicts involved, and you could have a site yellow screen of death, a site failure. So when you're running both of those things, I recommend that you have this script on hand. Just click into this contribution number 109, and it's a PowerShell script. You run it, and usually resolves compatibility issues with Plantin App and 2Sexy. So that's the first one. There was also a bug fix in Automation Scheduler, and this was dealing with a migration issue for people who are migrating from version 1.25 to 1.26. There was an occasional, you might have encountered a migration issue, so this resolves it if you encountered it. And then two things in our search product have changed. One is that uh, there's search the search product has the ability to sort the results in a way that makes sense to you. So whether you want to sort by titles or dates or priorities, you can influence the order of the way that things come out, and that so this was a bug fix to correct the sorting issue. So if that was plaguing you, you can install this update and get that functionality. And then we've introduced a new feature where you can remove records from Search Boost. So this is an action that automatically we include content in Search Boost, and this is a way to pull content out of search. As content changes, or if you've removed some content or some pages, it's the ability to remove them from the index. So several nice features. If you need them, you can install them. I'm going to trigger the installation of these. I'm just going to select all and say install selected hotfixes. And then I'm going to move that to the side. We won't wait for that to finish, but all those are there available for you if you need it. Um, So moving on from that, I will mention that we do an event. I went to the Campfire website. We do an event every week, Fridays, this same hour. And it's an opportunity for us to get together and talk. It's a meeting format. It's a very friendly group. So whether you learn from the experiences of other people in the low coding plant and app world, or whether you have a specific problem that you want to deal with, do come to this, engage in it, and learn something, gain something, share something. We have some links for this episode, so you can register in advance for the Low Code Campfire. You can get to our webinar recordings that I mentioned earlier. Our community portal is a great place to get questions answered by the community and by us. And we have this feedback form. So and all that is good. Also, this is part two of a series, so there's a link to our part one if you missed it. Patrick will put those here on the chat, I suppose, in a minute. And we move on to our low coding for today. Our part two is mastering business logic. This whole series is automating testing. So last time we talked about how to um, uh, get test to see that a form, maybe a very complex form, um, submits the same fields, it submits the same data, and testing that it is reliable. Um, Part two today, we're going to focus on you've got some business logic, and we want to be able to test that and make sure that it stays operational, doesn't change, or doesn't get disturbed by changes that you're making behind the scenes. And then part three, somewhere along, whether it'll be 2 weeks from now or scheduled for a later time, we will demonstrate how you can test things with a test suite called Cypress. And this is useful, for example, to be able to directly interact with your forms, so or listings or whatever your interface is, so you can automate the clicking of buttons and the typing of data and then see the result that happens. And this is a technique that we use internally on our end-to-end testing system and other tests to make sure that the interface we record and verify that the interface works in a particular way, and then we can apply that same test to later versions of the software, so that we can validate that the interface continues to work as we would expect. So it works for us with making sure Plantain app stays good, and then the applications that you could use this same testing strategy to make sure that your application is running as you would expect, whether it's with a new version of Plantain app installed or if you've been making changes to the to your application. So uh, when all three of these are done, it'll be a nice comprehensive set of tests. So for our goal today, where are we going? We want to be able to test logic, test your business logic, and we're going to do that by focusing on workflows. We have a nice starting point. I've got a form with logic that's pretty easy to explain, and so we'll take a look at that. We're eventually going to move that logic from being within a form on a button to putting it into a workflow, and that's going to make it more easily testable. And then we'll test that workflow using another dedicated workflow. So you click on a button, it tests one workflow tests another and gives a result, pass, fail. And then we'll take it to the next step where we do a data-driven workflow to test. And that provides a nice way to be able to test any number of workflows within your system in a nice manageable way. So that's where we're going. Um, so let's dig down into the first level. This goal that we're doing testing logic by using workflow. We have you can have a circumstance and it can apply to forms and listings and APIs and automations anywhere where you have what we often refer to as action stacks, a stack of actions, low-code actions that are in your form, for example, and you click on the button. The only way to test that is to go to the form and click the button, and it runs the actions that are there, and you have to validate that it worked the way that you expect it. It's only available in that one context. The same thing can be true for listing buttons, or if you're trying to do an API, the API can have actions in it, or automations can have actions in it, and so you just have to run the thing to test it. If you move your logic into a workflow, and workflows have inputs and outputs, it still allows you to use that logic in the original context. You can move the logic from a form into a workflow and still use it in the form. And you can use it elsewhere if you need the same logic, but it also makes it testable. It can be testable interactively. You can create a dedicated workflow, data-driven workflow. You're going to see all that today. And you can set up automation to test it, for example, on a regular basis, or when a workflow, when a form, whatever has changed, you can automatically run the tests and make sure that it's still working as you would expect. So that's where we're going. So let's look at our starting point. I have a form with some logic. It's a building permit form, and the form, when you click the button, it's going to compute some values. It's also going to do some validating and some warning. So let's take a look at it. This is the same system that we used in part one, but I've just added on to it in our form test section. We have a building permit. So the building permit is already built, and I'm going to show you exactly what's behind it, but the basic fields, we have a name and an email, we have a land width in feet, so if I have a parcel of land 100 feet wide by 100 feet deep, and I want to do a single family home, notice that it has a minimum of half an acre. I click save, and it computes the square footage is 100 times 100, 10,000 square feet, which is less than a quarter of an acre. And so I have a field here, size is valid, it's not checked. And we have a warning message, you must have land acreage of 0.5 or greater to proceed. So this is the basic purpose of the form. If I increase this to 250 by 250 and save, now we have more square feet. We have about an acre and a half. We get size as valid and a message valid. If I change this to apartments that have a minimum of 5 acres to build apartments, this is all fictional, of course, but you hit save and now it says not valid. It's still computing the same square feet and acreage, but the size is not valid, and we have a different uh, um, acreage message, 5 acres in the amount. If we continue to increase the size, now we have a 14-acre parcel and we get valid. So that's the basic functionality. I wouldn't worry too much about, I mean, I'm doing a building permit just as an example. But the point is you have a form, you have data you're collecting, you have logic that you're trying to apply, and so you want to be able to test that. And so we have something now that is functional, but all the logic exists underneath this button, and you can only test it by interacting with this form. So I'm just going to cover the logic of the form for a minute. I think that'll help to give context. We have our fields. Nothing particularly special about the fields, but we have land depth, width feet, depth feet, a construction type, and then these computed fields, square foot and acreage. The save button has its logic here in actions. So there's first a set of actions that compute the area. We compute the land square feet by using a do math token, uh, where the expression is land width feet times land depth feet, and so that gives us square foot, land square feet. We have another computation that is a do math that takes this land square feet and divides it by the constant to come up with acreage, 43,560 square feet to the acre. And so we get land acreage. We have some logic that determines validity. So I'm starting with setting size as valid to true and the warning message to value valid. It's just defaulting. Then there's a computation if the construction type is single family home and the land acreage is less than 0.5, then it turns to false and has an error message. Likewise, if the construction type is multifamily housing or apartments, that's the code for apartments. I suppose I skipped past that, so let me take a look at construction type. It's single family home has the value SFH. Apartments have MFH or multifamily homes. Didn't want to confuse you as to where that came from. So our logic here for multifamily homes is that you have to have, if it's less than 5 acres, then we go to false. So we're defaulting to true and going to false if it doesn't qualify, and then doing an update form AJAX. So the result of this then is you click the button and it does those small computations and displays them back on the screen. Any questions about how I'm set up? And Patrick, does any of that make sense, or did I skip anything?
No, I think it's making sense so far.
Thank you. So I'm not making any changes to that. I'm just showing that we have those computations and they work and how they come out. So that's our starting point. Moving on, the first thing that you can do to make this easily testable is to create a workflow out of your logic. I'm not going to impact my form right away. I'm just going to move the logic into a workflow, and then we can do some testing. Once we have it tested out, we can update the form to use the workflow. So uh, we move the logic into a place that it's still works just the same, and we can consume it, but now then it sets us up to consume it in another way. So let's take a look at how to do that. On our save button, we have this logic, and so it's two actions that do this uh, uh, that we've already covered. I'm going to start a workflow and then copy these into the workflow. So let's see, if we go to configuration and workflows, we're going to create a new workflow, and I'm going to name it the building permit area validation. And so I can name it here, save, and then we have to worry about inputs and outputs. Well, the inputs and outputs are going to be the same as um, as our forms. And I'm going to keep the names the same so that it it stays very easy to um, track, to keep track of things rather than changing names. Anyway, you'll see it here in just a second. So bringing it up on another screen just to make it a little bit easier to copy and paste. So the inputs that we're going to need are the land width feet. That's something that's going to be coming from the form, and that is a integer number. So land width feet. In the same way, we need land depth feet, and it will be an integer number. And construction type. So these are the factors that we need in order to be able to compute the outputs. So width times depth gives us both the square footage and the acreage. We use the construction type in the logic to determine whether or not it's the right size. For outputs, we are going to have 4 outputs. So that is the land square feet is the output name. And I'm going to just pre-wire this. I'm going to assume that in my process, I'm going to come up with land square feet as an output. And so save myself time here by wiring it all up at the same time, just realizing that I have to hit this um, to create these in my process. So land square feet, land acreage are going to be computed. I'm also going to get size is valid, which is going to be also created likewise, and the warning message. So if we provide this, the square foot, the width, the depth, and the construction type, it's going to be able to compute square feet, acreage, whether or not it's valid, warning message. All my business logic is going to be contained here in the process. So let's do the process. The good news is we can import this from our form. So I can export this action and import it. So it's coming from the form and into the workflow. And so we have our same logic that we had in the form we now have here. So it's taking land width feet times land depth feet. Since we made these as inputs, they're going to be available to compute that. And then we have our acreage, same calculation. So we've moved it from our form, or copied it from our form. In the same way we can do the validity, we can just copy that out and import it and connect it up. And we'll create an end. Now, that import output, the import process managed to lose us our description. So if we look at the description is still here, but I'm going to move it up into the title so that I like my blocks, my workflow blocks to have a explanation of what's going on in each block. So that improves it just a little bit. So we can save that. And as a matter of fact, we can save it and test it. We have inputs, so we can say 100 and 100 and single family home. And we get square feet 10,000, 0.22 acres. The size is valid, is false. Warning message is appropriate. And if we were to go do the same thing on our nice interactive form, we should have the same answer. There's 100, 100, and single family home gives us 10,000, 0.22, and our message. So our workflow is working the same way as the form. We can do the same thing, use the multifamily home, and gives the same information, but 5 acres is the message. So this just shows number one, we've done the work of moving this to the workflow, but now we've already achieved some business logic testability. You can interactively open the workflow, type in some values, get a result, and validate that it's working correctly, totally separate from your form. So if your form did other things, used this information in some way, and maybe created a database or something, um, the just the act of testing it on the form might cause you things that you have to erase or account for on your production system. By isolating it this way, we can run this test without impacting anything. Um, and finally, if we 250 and 2500, we get 14 acres, and it's true and valid, and so we're all in good shape. So we've got this nice workflow set to go, and we've tested the inputs and outputs. So going back to where our goal, first thing, we want to go and change our form to use this workflow so that um, it's consuming the same logic that we're about to test. Um, Pretty easy to do that. We go to the building permit form, and on our button, instead of doing these execute actions, and I'm just going to false these out so that they don't work anymore. Um, that right? Yep. So if I false these out and now run my form, click the button, nothing happens. They're not working anymore. So now we go in and I, I guess that's the magician in me. I like to show you what's up my sleeve. Nothing is up my sleeve. It doesn't work. We're now adding the building permit validation. So we're executing it as a workflow, and we're passing in value of feet. So the width, depth, and the construction type. See the value of keeping all the names the same. I can just copy and paste. So these values are coming from the form up here, these three things. And then these four things here, square feet, acreage, sizes, valid warning message, all coming from as outputs. And notice this, for those who are following along and haven't done this very much before, realize that outputs should go to you don't use a token. So this is saying get the value of this thing and send it to the workflow. This is saying take the value of it and put it in this variable. So this is the name of a variable, so you don't use brackets. It can be a little confusing if you haven't done it before. Anyway, so these are going back to the values of the form, and then we're still doing our update form Ajax. So this workflow, one call to the workflow is now doing all of your business logic. So try it again. And now these values are coming from the workflow, and it's working as expected. So we have done our first objective. We've moved the logic to a workflow, and the form is now using the workflow. So we've got ourselves back to the place where we started, and now we can move on to improved testing. The first area that we're going to test is to create a workflow that's dedicated to testing our workflow. So we can create a workflow that is about, that's called test one for the building permit validation, and we're going to test these values, the 100 by 100 multifamily home. We just want to make sure that it works. So to do that, we go to workflows and create a new workflow. It's going to be called that, and I'm going to call it test one. And in the description, I'm going to put in this 100 by 100 multifamily home. And so it's not going to have any inputs. We're just going to run our workflow and see how it turns out, and then do some work to present that in a nice way. So um, let me get my copy and paste system so I can do more explaining and less thinking. So the first step of this is to um, we're going to default our results to pass. So we're setting the result value to pass, and the reason is blank. Everything. This is our kind of um, default scenario. We assume that things are going to pass until they fail. We're going to run our execute building permit validation, and we're going to provide it some values. So we're going to say 100, 100, MFH, and we're going to get out some of the values. Again, I'm going to use these same ones. So that we can do things with them. And I like to test along the way. So, um, for example, in we could already start doing an output called debug and output the value of um, land acreage just to demonstrate that it works. So we could save and test this. We run it and it says the land acreage is 0.22. That's the 100 by 100 item. So that's just a quick demonstration to show that this is working, is performing some work, and now we're going to test it to see if it did what we expected. So I have prepared again some actions that are going to do that. The first one is to check the land square feet. So we're saying if the land square feet is not equal to 10,000, we have a predetermined value that we know is right. And so if it's anything other than 10,000, then the result will be fail. And the reason will be the land square feet is this when we expected that. And so now we're going to do that same exercise with all our other four variables. So there's the check land acreage that we'll export and import. So if the land acreage is anything other than this number that we're expecting, then we will add that to we'll say it's a fail, and we're going to add that to the reason. And so we'll do that. Let me do these two more. So size is valid. We're expecting it to be false. If it's not false, then we get the value of what it is. The last one, message. We're expecting the warning message to be you must have 5.0 or greater to proceed. If it's not that, then we get what it is. And then in all of these, we're creating reason and result. So I am going to take these. reason and result, and those are our actual outputs that we want from this. So we'll have the reason and result. And we really don't need this debug one anymore, so we'll get rid of that. So now we can save and test. And we get a pass. It worked as expected. We can, just for fun, we can demonstrate what happens when somebody accidentally or mistakenly changes the workflow that we're testing. If we go to this workflow and uh, edit it, and we'll make a mistake in the computation here. This planned mistake will just add a foot to the square footage. But if we've made a mistake on that and try to run our test, we get the land square feet is 1,001. We were expecting or 10,001, expecting 10,000. Land acreage is this. We were expecting that. And so this quick test proves that that our testing workflow works. Right? I got to put this back the way it belongs so that we can move on. But so accurately computing this, and so we can run our test and good to go. So in our scope of where we are, we've created a dedicated workflow. It allows you to do a test, and we can test specific scenarios very quickly. So we have a specific scenario, we can run it. Yes, our test workflow is working as we would expect. We can test other scenarios pretty quickly. Um, we can just make a copy of that, and let's say that we're going to we'll make up test number 2, and the scenario we're going to do is 100 by 100 single family home. And so in that case, the square feet, 100 by 100, we're still expecting 10,000. Actually, we can do this interactively, right? 100, 100. Everything is the same except this message is different. So we're expecting that message. So in the warning message expectations, we're expecting, we change our expectation here to, oh, no, we're doing single family is what we're trying. So we are expecting 0.5, and we change our messaging here and change our test here. So we're testing 100 by 100 SFH, and it passes because it's all of those same values. So, and I'm going to stop there, but you could do as many different tests as you want to be able to validate that the workflow is working as you expect. And as you added more of these, they're going to show up. You've got test 1 and test 2 and test 3, and maybe you have 20 more tests. Very easy to run them and see that they pass. And you could even write something that would run all those tests and save the pass fail result and the reason result and send it in an email to yourself to say, here's what we validated. This thing is working as expected. So that's a great benefit. You can run the test interactively, and it's a validation that everything's working. And you definitely could automate it, send a report, but there's room for improvement. You're going to add many, many workflows to test one workflow to test everything, or maybe you figure out how to do that where one workflow tests many things, but it becomes unwieldy to manage. But it's a great start. So last phase here where we're going to is that we're going to test the workflow with a data-driven workflow. We're going to create some entities that will hold the test that you want to accomplish, the inputs for that test, the outputs that you expect, and then uh, a workflow that will perform a test. It'll get the inputs for the test, run the workflow that's under test, compare the outputs to what you were expecting, and update the test with that result. By doing it this way, we have one workflow called perform workflow test that can test any number of things, and it's all just about the data. So that's where we're going, and that's where we'll get to in the next 20 minutes. To save a little bit of time, I'm going to input these structures and we'll just talk about them here real quick. So the first one we're going to do is the test inputs. Sometimes it's easier um, to do the inputs and outputs are properties of the test, and so I want to create them first. Anyway, here we go. We do entities, and we're going to import an entity, and then I'll explain what it looks like. Explain rather what it is. So we did one that's test input. I'm going to modify it. I uh, want it to appear under the system parent page. But the properties are that we have a name and a value. The name of the input that we're sending to the workflow and the value that we're sending to the workflow. That's what these are. And so I'm going to save that and merge them back. So what we get then is that under system, there's now this test inputs. We're not going to add things to it directly here, but it's here in the menu. So I have test inputs. The next we're going to do is test outputs, and it's pretty much the same thing. That. Edited in the same way. I want it to be under the system menu, and it has the name of the output that you're expecting and the value that you're expecting. And so we'll save that. The final one is the test. And oops, import. The test, again, I want it to go under the system page, but the properties for it include that it has a name of a test, which workflow are we going to run, what was the last result, the last reason, the last run date, and then what are the inputs and the outputs that are connected to the test. So we'll save that. So the way that this is going to get used is if we go to system tests, we can use this to define our tests. Now there's one change that I'm going to want to make. Well, I'll demonstrate it to you. We're going to put in the name and the workflow that needs to be tested, but the workflow is going to be called by its unique ID, and we don't want to have to go find that ID. So we're going to modify the form so that um, it will look it up for us. So we're going to change the workflow ID from a workflow GUID from a text box to a drop down, single choice drop down, and change the logic for this to be a SQL query. And the SQL query, this is one that I'll put here on the clipboard as well. You can use this. This is the query that looks out at our workflow tables and gets the name and the ID. So the name, we're going to see the name as text of every workflow and the global ID as value. And so when you select from this list, it will put the GUID in that field. So how does this look? We're going to do a test called building permit area station 100 by 100 MFA. That's the name of the test we're doing, and we are going to run the building permit area validation test. These things are going to get filled in by our test, so we don't have to worry about them. But notice it picked out the GUID for us, and so we didn't have to find it or type it. We can just do that. There's going to be inputs and outputs, so let's dive into the inputs that we're going to do. The values that we're going to add here are the same thing. We have land width feet, which is the same variable name. This is the variable name that's going to go into the input, and the value we're going to pass it is 100. We also want to pass, for this test, the land depth feet. And we're passing in 100. And we're also going to pass in the construction type. It is multifamily housing. So these three values need to be passed into the workflow. And then we're going to look at the outputs as well for this test. And the outputs that we are expecting are that we want land square feet to be 10,000. We want land acreage to be, and this is the same value that we computed earlier, so I basically copied and pasted it out of the form, but we're expecting it to be this number. The size is valid. We are expecting to be false. And the warning message, we are expecting it to be this. So this is one definition of a test. We're going to run this workflow. We're going to pass it the feet, the width, the depth, and the construction type, and then we're going to check to make sure that all these values are good. So this gives us the data we need. We could define any number of tests with this one mechanism, and we could test any number of workflows. So once you've got invested the effort to set this up, and it's not that hard, you're able to test a lot. So this is going to be another workflow. It's going to be called perform workflow test. And in the interest of time, this is another one that I'm just going to import the whole thing and then just explain. We'll demonstrate it so that you can, we'll walk through each piece of it so you can recreate this on your system. So the inputs, well, it's almost worked. And let's see if we're going to be able to fix this or not. The input that we need is a test. Let's see if it's going to save. Nice. All right. So when we run the workflow test, the only thing we're going to have to point it to is which test are we running. And from an output standpoint, it's going to output a debug output, which we can look at and later delete. But it's also going to output the result and the reason, just like our other one did. And so we can say, run the test, get the output. The process are these steps here, and I'll talk about each of them, put some stuff on the clipboard for you to be able to reuse. The first thing that we want to do is to be able to get the inputs. We're going to do that by way of some SQL. This is joining from the test table to the test inputs and doing it for only one test ID. So the test ID that came in is the test ID we're going to do. And just to demonstrate, if I were to go to the SQL console, and this SQL console is where I developed this SQL in the first place, and run it, we can see that we're getting the test name. I didn't do the where clause, I just did it for everything, but we get the test name and the inputs. The test input name is land width feet, 100, depth, 100, construction type, MFH. So this returns inputs and outputs that we can use here in this as a list. And so the name of it is input list. And yeah, ready to go. I'm going to put this whole, it might be a useful explanation. I'm going to put it on the chat, but just showing that when you're going from and using a list of entities that you join from the, in this case, we're joining from test through the test inputs to the test input table. Anytime you have a list of, there's a join table that describes what the what inputs are connected to what test, and so that's why we're joining through there. We've covered that on different episodes as well. So that's now we have a list of what the inputs are, and in the next step, we're going to work through that input list and create some tokens. We want to do, we need to split out the things that, split out these inputs and make them available for the workflow that we're going to test. So this gets a little bit complex, and I encourage you to just look at it carefully, but you should be able, if you're following along with me after the fact, you should be able to copy and paste, do these exact same values, and it should work. But what we're doing is we're creating a value called name, and then the input list index is explained up here in the top. The index is the index entry of the list. So it starts with 0 for the first record, and then as it goes for each record that's in the list, it'll become 1 and then 2 and then 3. So this is giving us a name 0 the first time, and it'll be name 1 for the second record, and so on. This is just giving us access to the name of the input, and then we're assigning it the value of the test input name again. So it'll have the value like name 0 will be land width feet. Name 1 will be land depth feet, like that. And then the value, same way, we're going to have value 0 coming from the test input value. So value 0 will be 100, value 1 will be 100, value 2 will be MFH as a result of this. It's very key that you click this checkbox, tokenize token names. It means that the place where this is stored, this value gets evaluated, and so this is going to be a 0 the first time, and so that creates name 0, value 0. The reason we go through all that is we want to execute, we're going to run the action called execute workflow, and this is the generic action where we provide it the workflow GUID. So we can say the workflow GUID that's associated with the test is the workflow we're going to run. We do that by expression. So this will let us test any workflow. And then we need to pass the values, and I'm passing in name 0. This is what was created in the last step. The value of name 0 is the field we want to influence, and we're passing it value 0. All this is a little bit convoluted, but it's required because workflow inputs um, must be specified. You have to provide values. And so the last step gets them into a nice known place, the name and the value, and then you can pass them. You'll want to expand this for as many values as you need to test. I've done this for 4 total, but you could add value 4 and 5. If you're passing more values to some workflows, you can just expand that and it'll work. And by the way, if your workflow doesn't accept values 4 and 5, that's fine. It won't hurt it.
Yeah, I'm noticing that on that last line you have value three for in the workflow input. Is there a reason for that, or is it just missed in
It's a
the?
mistake. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for correcting my code. Somebody's paying attention. Name 3. As it turns out, there were only 3 inputs in this workflow that we're testing, so it happened to work. And then if we had tested one that had 4 inputs, it would have failed. So thanks for that. The output of this thing is going to be, I'm calling it R for result, but when this workflow runs, all of the outputs are going to be stored in this base output token called R. So we'll get R land square feet, R land acreage, that kind of thing. And that's it. So we'll save that and definitely want to save that change. So we got our inputs, we executed the workflow, and now I'm going to do the work we're similar to the last one. We want to default. We're going to assume everything passes. So the result is passed, the reason is blank, and now we're going to worry about our outputs. In the same way as before, we're going to use some SQL to create an output list. These are the outputs that we're expecting. I'm going to just pass again this chat in case anybody's curious. Um, but we are going from the test to the test outputs to the test output outputs, the join table, and then to the test outputs. This is going to give us the outputs relative to the one test we care about, the test ID, which comes from the test. It gives us the outputs list. So once we've got that list, now we can do the comparison. So for every one of these in the output list, we're checking every output and we say, and here again, it gets a little bit convoluted, but it works. We're checking the output list, test output value. So the value that comes from, this is the input one, but this is this test output value. We're comparing the test output value that we expect to the value that was provided by the workflow. So we're we're taking that same name and pulling it out of R. Again, R was the thing that the result that holds all the outputs from the workflow that are under test. If it's not equal, then the result becomes fail and the reason gets expanded. And I'll let you look at that. You can absolutely copy exactly the way it is there if you were doing this work and to put it onto your system. And then, so the result of going through this loop is that every output gets tested and the result will change from pass to fail if any one of them fail, and the reason gets built up based on the values that are coming from our database. The last step is that whatever we're going to update our original test, and we're going to set the result to whatever the result variable is and the reason, whatever the reason is. And so this, and the last run date of the test is our current date and time. So everything gets updated. And so now we can test it. So let's see how all this works. It's a lot of talking. Let's see how it works.
So the only limitation here is really the outputs that you have. The inputs in that is the number you have in the execute workflow. That's the number of inputs you have for the execute workflow. That's the only if you had a workflow with more inputs, then you would need to.
Yes, absolutely. This action here will automatically split and create tokens for as many inputs as are um, on the input side of the test input. You would make sure that this execute workflow includes as many um, lines. If you had 10 parameters, you'd want to continue expanding and add name 4, name 5, and name 6, value 4, name value 5, value 6. So it would, in effect, that would wire it so that there's um, as many inputs as you have. That way, it would send those to the workflow that's under test. On the other hand, the outputs don't have that issue, so as many as there are, those will automatically be tested. All right, so let's see this thing at work. If we save and test and choose the test that we want to run, so we're going to run the 100 by 100 MFA, and we run it, we get this debug section. We can take a look at that, but it's showing the return from the workflow. The land square feet is 10,000. Land acreage is the 0.22. Size is valid false. Warning message is that message, and it all passes. So those are the values that we expect. For the purposes of testing, um, if we demonstrate that if we again make that same change, or we'll make even a larger change to the compute area, and let's say that we add 100,000 square feet arbitrarily to this, that's just a mistake in the code. If we now go to our workflow and perform this workflow test and select the test, we get that the land square feet is uh, the acreage goes up to 2.5 and still have a warning message. So the test fails because the land square feet is 110,000, but we're expecting 10,000, and the land acreage is 2.52, and we're expecting 2.229. So the test is working, and if we run that, um, it will prove that the underlying workflow is working as expected. Um, we put it back to the way it's supposed to be, and just remove all that arbitrary addition. If we save that and go back and run our workflow test, that it runs and it passes, and there's no reason associated with it because it is correct. Um, and so now if we were to go and look at the system tests, we'll see that that test has passed and the last run date that it happened, and that there were no errors. Um, So going from here, it would be easy to go on and add as many tests as we want for this particular workflow, and we could test any other workflows that um, requires inputs and outputs with the same mechanism. So that's where we were trying to get to. We have a data-driven workflow. It has entities of tests and inputs and outputs. Um, the perform workflow test. It gets the inputs from the test, it executes the workflow that was selected, it compares the outputs, and then it stores the information onto the test. So that gives us now three different ways to do a test. You can either interactively test the workflow just by running it. You can use the hard-coded versions, or you can perform a workflow test. And that's the data dynamic one. It would be a relatively simple step to go on to use automation and the data table trigger to automatically perform this workflow test anytime that a workflow changed um, using a data trigger. And so if the automation ran all the related tests and then emailed a report to the end user, it would show, yep, you modified this workflow and all the tests passed. And so that would be one way of continuously making certain that the workflows work as they intended. Or if the change is intentional, then you can of course modify the test's inputs and outputs to reflect the new the changes that you were trying to make. All right, so I think we hit our target. We handled testing on several different levels. We're glad that you spent this hour with us learning about how to do business logic testing through low code. And we will end it here. We'll go on to the Cypress Part 3 in the weeks to come. But we hope that you gain some value by spending your hour with us. We'll see you again next time.